You get pushed into 2030 for 10 minutes and you get one Google search. What you looking for? The history of the 2020s. Reddit, you go back in time to 2023. What would you do? Has George R.R. Martin finished the series? Looking up obituaries for terrible public figures. CEOs, politicians, hate group leaders, etc. Then upon return anonymously creating a widely announced death note scenario where one of the tracked individuals has their death announced a day in advance for their heinous behavior. At first it's a hoax, a joke, or several lucky guesses, but after enough accurate predictions the doubt begins to creep in. The influential sleazes of the world begin to clean up their acts due to a quasi-mystical, unavoidable, and all-knowing threat of imminent doom. 2024 March Madness Bracket. Warren Buffett has a standing $1 billion offer to whoever gets a perfect bracket. Am I pregnant? 10 minutes for one Google search. I will search why the internet is so slow. Lottery numbers 2023. Biggest lottery winners 2023 and the numbers for the drawing just before them. 10 minutes is a long time. I may only get one Google search, but I'll DuckDuckGo the shit out the rest of that time. Probably look for my obituary. If I die of cancer then I will know to keep a lookout, get an early start on that shit. Catching it early is half the battle. How do I use the shells? The winners of the next 7 Super Bowls. And Baseball World Series. Gonna go Biff Tannen. Sports Almanac 2020 to 2030. GTA 6 release date. Geometry Dash 2.2 release date. What are the most positive things happening in the world right now that people don't think of? It's so easy to repopulate the earth of rare plants now through tissue culture. 2 years ago Brazil was freaking out trying to keep their last remaining Spiritus Sancti plants to themselves, and today, anyone can have them in their house and there is no market for poachers. After being diagnosed with breast and colon cancer last fall, my mom is, as of today, officially cancer-free. A malaria vaccine has been developed and is currently undergoing human trials. This could save hundreds of thousands of lives a year, many of them children. Pandas are no longer an endangered species. This guy honked at me for not going on green light fast enough, then caught up to me at the next light, rolled down his window and apologized for having a bad day and then drove off and waved. Also, interest in sustainable housing is growing all the time. Things like ships and rammed earth houses are gaining ground slowly, smiley face. A few global public health things. We have made tremendous progress on ending the AIDS epidemic in the last 40 years. The percentage of adults that smoke cigarettes is lower than it has been historically. We went from like 800k cases of guinea worm in the world in the late 80s to 12 in 2022. For the first time in decades there have been Iberian lynx sightings in the region of Madrid. 2 sightings in the last week, huge news as this species is among the most endangered animals in the world. Deleted. California's Lake Oroville is now back at being 100% full after being dangerously low from years of drought. More young women and girls in less developed countries are in primary and secondary education than ever before. More people worldwide are vaccinated than ever before, and a number of malaria vaccines are currently showing pretty positive results. Since 1990, the number of people living in extreme poverty has more than halved, from 2 billion to around 700 million. The rate of infant mortality is consistently declining year on year. Lots still wrong with the world, lots of things that have gotten worse. But these are significant improvements that shouldn't be understated. Constant and unrelenting negativity breeds passiveness. Knowing what we've done well helps us to understand what we're capable of, and allows us to tackle the problems in a more pragmatic and effective manner. The US has more trees now than it did 100 years ago. More people than ever before have access to clean drinking water and basic sanitation, which is saving thousands of lives. My lazy ass decided I should finally go in for a physical, and it turns out they found a thoracic aortic aneurysm that could have killed me instantly. Having open heart surgery in the next few days to fix it. Honeybees are at an all-time high, and are now considered overpopulated. The whole Save the Bees was never made for honeybees, but instead other species such as the mining bees. My very old cat got her blood work done today and everything seems to be great. What is your never interrupt an enemy while they are making a mistake moment? I was accused by a neighbor of reversing out my drive and hitting his car. He gave me the date and time I had allegedly done it, and pointed to a small scrape on my car that supposedly matched perfectly the location of the dent on his. This was 7 weeks after the alleged event, by the way. I said it wasn't me but told him to contact his insurance and we'd see what they said. Few weeks later I get a letter from my insurance asking what had happened, to which I responded with the date I had bought my car, and updated my insurance, 2 weeks after the supposed bump. He never spoke to me again, but I used to give him a cheery wave every time I saw him glowering at his window. Years ago I worked extremely hard on preparing a presentation for a tech conference. It would be my first speaking gig. I was nervous AF. I practiced. I refined. I got advice. I practiced some more. My manager was generally a nasty woman, but she was supportive of this, though she never once saw or heard my presentation. We traveled to Vegas. It turns out there was a far greater demand than they expected, so they moved us to the main stage room. They were expecting about 500 plus walk-ins. I was 10x nervous AF. Well, immediately prior to the start, she noticed a very well-known media person and their photographer sitting in the front row. She got all excited and insisted that she was going to CO deliver it. She even went so far as to put her name on title slide. So, I of course was fuming. We go on stage, she does a decent intro and then I start in. She keeps interrupting, so I just let her run with it. It reminded me of a morning show. A bunch of people, with overwhelmingly fake smiles talking over each other. This was a deeply technically topic with a live demo. She fumbled each slide worse than the next. And then she got to the live demo slide and froze. I had the wherewithal to let her die. It was gloriously brutal. We had a, let's say, confrontation after. I left within 2 to 3 mo's. She got fired shortly after. Oh, and the media people she was prancing for left immediately before the start. I think they were just sitting there from the prior session. Perfect. When I practiced family law I saw this often on the stand. Turns out if your opponent is crazy most of the time all you need to do to reveal that is give them a microphone and mildly question their story. The best, however, was in motion to withdraw hearings. For context, I hated these hearings. I dreaded them. I already felt like a failure for having to withdraw from a case, 95% of the time because the client couldn't/wouldn't pay me, but sometimes because they turned out to be uncooperative and/or combative with me. They were not difficult to win, however. Inevitably if I simply asked the client when and how they intended to write their retainer, they'd start listing off excuses about how they don't and never will have the money to do so. It's heartbreaking, but it also proves my point. The clients who were uncooperative, however, were the best. I'd read off a list of times they cursed me out, ignored my advice, and threatened me and my staff, then just wait. You could watch their blood boil on the stand, followed by completely unhinged justification as to why no lawyer could reasonably work with this person. Mr. Jones, can you explain why you threatened to shove a phone up my paralegal's ass if she called you again? She calls me every fucking week with another fucking thing that I have to do. You're supposed to be handling my case. It's why I hired you. I don't have time to be searching through my emails and getting bank records and bringing you papers every damn day. And every time my retainer is empty for like a day she calls to remind me to refill it. I've got other things to pay for, like the damned child support you put on me when I left. How rude can you be, right? Right? I swear if I have to hear her damned voice one more fucking time I'm going to drive over there and slap the shit out of her. Your Honor, I rest my case. In a meeting with my project manager who has not been in the office or worked a proper full day for months. She has increasingly been annoyed by people bypassing her to get things done by telling me and her other direct reports what to do. I was about to answer a question for stakeholders, she told me to let her speak one sentence and will let me have my bit. I did as I was told, and she told the stakeholder a completely wrong thing about the system we were handling and made a complete fool out of herself. She got sacked this month. Roommate's ex abandons their vehicle in front of my house. I tell them to please move it or I will have it towed. Vehicle suddenly has 2 flat tires. Ex files police report claiming my roommate and I had slashed their tires. Waited until X made their statement to the police about how we had slashed their tires and that is why they couldn't move his vehicle and filed a claim against us in small claims court. Provided police and the court copies of my and our neighbor's door cam footage showing the X arriving in the middle of the night to slash their own tires. Cherry on top, X shows up in court wearing the same shirt as in the videos. Edit, wow, this blew up. Roommate and X had only been dating a few months. X turned out to be a grifter and was dating several people at the same time and using each of them for food, shelter, money, etc. I got involved when my roommate was out of town and the soon-to-be ex just sauntered in. Apparently they had learned the code to the garage door, made themselves a sandwich, showered, slept, etc. I thought my roommate had come home early, but when I texted them they were still out of state. The ex left to go out and I changed the garage code. The vehicle wouldn't start, so they just left it there thinking it would be okay. Roommate and a few of the other people the ex was dating find out about each other and they all dump them at once. I ask the ex to please move their car or I will have it towed. I give them 2 weeks. Later on I learned that the ex was having a mental breakdown and they made some very poor decisions at that point. They broke into some of the other people's houses when they weren't home to do laundry, eat, sleep, and did some other things that got them in trouble with the law but are irrelevant to this story. The ex had no proof that anyone had slashed their tires. The cops just came to the door of me and our neighbors to see if there was any footage. There was, and they closed the case. I guess they never talked to me again about it. The court case was small claims court. The plaintiff has to pay a fee, file a form, have a summons issued to the defendant, and then you both show up in court with your evidence. The ex had no evidence other than a long list of real and perceived grievances with my roommate but no actual proof, so the judge dismissed the case. I never got to show the video evidence to the judge, but I did share it with the clerk on their lunch break and they were the one who pointed out that the ex was wearing the same shirt. At my current job, part of my duties is to do trailer audits, make sure people are unloading/loading safely, and I was training a new member for the position to do the job. After a few weeks, it turns out that the other person wasn't doing any aspects of the job, instead they were just mingling like it was a cocktail party. When asked why they weren't doing anything, they say it was because they were never trained. Well, turns out that due to past complaints about this particular person, management put them on a PIP, that if they got any type of training they were to have a piece of paper documenting what kind of training it was, who trained them, and management sign off, with all parties' signatures. When they pulled the file that said they were indeed trained in all duties of the job, they just sat there silent and was fired. They were fired because they pulled the same stunt in every department of the building, and mine was their last chance. Guy stole a presentation from me. This is 25 years ago. We hated each other. When he started presenting I realized I had made a huge error, didn't say anything. Let him get through it. Asked him about the error, he couldn't answer. This was in front of Ku. Got fired, not for just that, he was an overall douche. This was before everyone was on PCs, had one printer in one room. I let the lady who changed lanes into me run her mouth about how I rear-ended her before pulling the cop aside to show him my dashcam footage. Not an enemy, but in retrospect should have been. I work as a teacher and we had an ex-manager guy who decided to get into teaching late. He had lots of pretty horrible habits, eating other people's lunches, perving on the female teachers, squeezing people's shoulders painfully hard as a matey gesture, but the habit that this story is about, is how he tried to use weaponized incompetence to get people to do his tasks for him. None of it was really important. He just seemed to enjoy talking people into doing things for him. So he comes up to me one day with a USB data stick in his hand. Apparently it has a copy of a previous year's exam that it was his responsibility to update and edit. He'd taken the file home and his daughter had done the update. Really, dude? Roping family into doing your paid government job for you. He wanted me to copy the file from the USB back into the server, replacing the original file he'd copied. It was literally click and drag between the USB and the file server. I flat out refused and said it was part of his responsibility and I was too busy with my own tasks. He proceeds to loudly and publicly proclaim to the entire staff room that I didn't understand how difficult it was for people of his generation to learn computer technology and that I really needed to help him out. That he was currently doing a computer course, but this, dragging a file between 2 folders, was too difficult for him to sort out. I let him go on for about a good 5 minutes about how horrible I was for not helping the poor helpless old man out, until I just as loudly asked him, how the hell did you get the original file from the server onto the USB in the first place? You could have heard a pin drop in that staff room. He walked off and copied his own goddamned file. When a coworker who I hated got fired a few weeks after I decided to stop fixing his mistakes even if it impacted a client. Not mine obviously, but the Space Shuttle Challenger engineer that knew it would explode, Bob Ebeling. He repeatedly said the cold weather would cause a failure despite pressure from NASA administration. He describes then, as making the best decision of his life, refusing to sign the paper indicating he approves of the launch, forcing his boss to do it. At the governmental inquiry after the death of the astronauts, NASA said the engineers signed a paper approving the launch that day. Which, yeah, that's true, but worded as deceptively as can be. Bob then stood up, walked to the hearing, said that he personally refused the launch but was overruled to the stunned members of the hearing. The government fired the NASA execs and made Bob head of the investigation. I was a lead developer in a small company producing IoT devices. My manager hired his friend from his previous company. A guy who was super arrogant and knew everything better. Theoretically, my opinion on the development of the project should be decisive, but neither my manager nor his buddy cared about it. I tried to talk to the manager about the problems with the new colleague, but he brushed me off. The new guy, being so brilliant, was given one important component of the system to do. Of course, he made it clear that he didn't need any help from me. Weeks and months passed. In the meetings, his component was always in the last phase of testing. But I had access to the Git repository, and I saw how messy it was. No one asked me for my opinion, so I didn't say anything. I waited. The deadline has come, the release of the product. And of course nothing works. Higher management became interested in the case, and my manager could only avoid being fired in one way: he fired his buddy. A few weeks later, I left the company. That was over a year ago, and as far as I know, the product still hasn't hit the market. As a CPS worker at the time, speaking to a father with police present in a case concerning substance use, and the father admitting being high on meth, and thinking the cops were there to arrest his daughter for stealing his meth, admits to me that she stole it because he let her have some, because if I didn't give it to her she'd go be a prostitute to get it. Just an entire 45-minute conversation with the guy having no apparent awareness that he had just told a CPS worker and 2 cops that he 1, is currently high on meth 2, routinely provides meth to his daughter 3, has meth in his trailer behind him 4, his daughter had been at the trailer with him while meth was in the trailer 5, the meth was stored where she could easily access it, and she knew where it was 6, he used meth with her. Just unfathomable levels of I'm struggling to believe this conversation is happening, and afraid if I say anything he'll come to his senses and shut up. During my very long and exhausting divorce, my ex-husband kept insisting he was ready to settle. We would schedule a conference with my lawyer and I, and then pushed papers around the table for 2 hours. He would just argue over petty details rather than actually discuss anything. This happened a few times. I was incredibly frustrated because I genuinely walked into this wanting to compromise so it would be over quickly. But that was never an option. Note that I hired a lawyer and he did not, he was convinced he could do it on his own better. So after a few rounds of this, I got the impression that he was trying to waste my money until I could no longer retain my lawyer, and then he thought he would have the upper hand. I made less than half of what he did at the time, and my lawyer's retainer fee wiped out my entire savings, so it was a very real concern. My suspicions were confirmed when one day as we were walking out of my lawyer's office, he told me this, word for word while chuckling. I passed this on to my lawyer, who actually cackled and told me let him. It was then that I learned that we were 6 months out from being married 10 years, and at that point, I would be entitled to a sizable part of his pension upon retirement. She let him play his games for 6 more months without saying a word, and then finally took our case before a judge 5 days after our 10-year anniversary. Not only did I get part of his pension, but she also got the judge to order him to pay almost all of my lawyer's fees. The beauty of it was that it 100% his fault for playing games. I used to live in an apartment that had a very old lease. College students basically passed this place's lease down like inheritance until it came to us, and, legally, the landlord could only increase the rent yearly by a small fraction of the current lease's rent. The exceptions to this were if the apartment was being renovated, in which case it would be her responsibility to accommodate us while renovating, or if it had been vacant for a year between leases. She knew our lease's rent was extremely low, and so wanted to get rid of us and jack up the rent on a new tenant. She sent us a letter about 2 weeks before our lease would be renewed saying she was renovating and would have to leave. Well, it happened my roommate was not just a college student, but a law student. And he happened to know she had to give us a lot more notice than that. So we plainly told her we weren't leaving and she'd be welcome to take us to court. Which, she did. She told the judge she wanted to renovate, and the judge asked her for the new floor plan and a cost estimate of the proposed renovation. She had none of those things. When the judge asked why, she said she'd only decided to renovate a week prior. When the judge asked why she'd taken this decision after the legal deadline, 6 months' notice are required to end a lease, she said she was only renovating so she could start a new lease on the property. The judge literally facepalmed at her response, dismissed the case, and renewed our lease with no rent increase for the year, since she hadn't presented us a new one with enough delay to contest it. We were just sitting there with our mouths open, bewildered that she could have been dumb enough to say the quiet part out loud straight to the judge.